seven kind of IB concepts that English covers.
Oh no, I
Not
never
really.
know
Okay.
those
Well, we're not
names.
gonna go over them really in depth because you're gonna be hearing about it later, and it's not very important to what we're gonna do today. But I think they're just concepts, just themes that are gonna be important when doing your analysis and looking at different texts in the next 2 years. So there's just seven concepts that cover a lot of IB related ideas. So the first one we have is identity, which kind of looks at what sort of characters are being portrayed, what parts of an author's identity could be seen throughout a text. And so these are just like small things that you can notice and use in your analysis. And so the second one is culture. So what sort of cultures can you see? Maybe an author is from a certain culture, and they're writing about it in their work that you might be analyzing. Um, and so this also kind of shows how if you're going to write about an author in your essays, for example, it might be helpful if you can to know a little bit about their background, um, not just look at their text, but know that maybe they were born here and they grew up in another place, and so maybe their work might be a fusion of these two cultures. So things like that. Communication is just about how an author might choose to communicate their ideas. Like I said in English, we're not just going to look at text, it's going to be about maybe photographs or film, like, and then you can think about why did they choose that? Um, how might they how might that help them get their point across? And creativity, and we're going to be looking at a lot of text, which you could consider as forms of art. And so just looking at what creative direction they might be authors might be going in. And then perspectives. Maybe um, one text could be one perspective on an issue, while um, a second text could be another perspective. Because I know that in one of your final assessments, you're going to have to compare and contrast two works of literature, and so that's something you could consider. Maybe there are two different stances. The sixth one is representation. What sort of people are being represented? What sort of problems are being represented? And the last one is transformation. Maybe one author or one artist took a certain idea and they transformed it into a whole new idea. And for example, you're reading Romeo and Juliet right now, and Romeo and Juliet, you can kind of see the story being duplicated in many new, more modern stories. For example, have you heard of like West Side Story?
No, I don't know.
It's like a love story. It's kind of a copy of Romeo and Juliet, except for it's kind of got the more modern twist to it. And so I think Romeo's side is even like a beach surfer gang, and then the other one is like a biker gang. And so just like looking at these transformations and looking at these shifts across maybe time or just space. So yeah, these are just small things to keep in mind. You'll definitely be covering them later on in your classes, so don't worry too much about them. Let's see. Okay, so first I kind of want to not just dive into it, but look at why is it important to analyze a text. Because like you said, for example, in Japanese school, you were just focusing on like what are these characters thinking, or just looking at the characters, and it's like, why do we have to do this? And it can be a lot of, it can just not be very motivating. It's like, so much and so hard. I don't want to do this. And so just, oh, sorry. Okay, so just, yeah, some things I jotted down was it helps you with your critical thinking skills, helps you understand the text better, and just understanding them just helps you not just with with fiction books, like being able to understand the story, but when you're reading pieces of nonfiction, maybe you're reading a news article. you can better understand the story and kind of be able to have your own opinion on it, because if you don't understand it, you can't really have your own opinion on it. Also allows a reader to assess the text's credibility. Do you know what credibility is?
No, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, so credibility or like reliability is basically like if a source can be trusted, if a text can be trusted. So if you see a piece of news on Instagram, maybe it has a lower credibility than if you saw it on maybe the New York Times page, something like that. So yeah, it helps you kind of assess the text and be like, oh, this is something doesn't look really good, the writing's kind of bad, maybe I shouldn't trust it. So things like that. And it helps us make connections with other texts. It allows you to compare and contrast, which is something you're going to be doing in the IB assessment. And then it can also help you find new perspectives on the certain topics that you might be reading about. And so yeah, it's just things to remember when you're feeling like, oh, why am I doing this? This is so boring, or this is not very fun. So I asked you about the big five of textual analysis. But before we go any further, do you have any questions, or do you want me to explain something about it? Or...
Okay.
You're okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the big five of textual analysis. I just wanted to show this to you because of how you said you struggled a little bit with analysis. My English IB teacher really shared this list with us, and it really, really helps me, at least personally, to organize my essays, because they're basically a checklist of things you can go down when writing your essay and analyzing text. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to get through all five of these today, but if not, that's totally okay. So the first one, the order we're going to go in is audience, purpose, and then content, theme, tone, and mood, stylistic devices, and then structure. And so if you've never heard of a couple of these, that's totally fine. And if you have, that's okay too. And feel free to stop me if you need time, or if you're like, oh, this is too easy. So yeah, the first one we're going to start with is audience and purpose. So when you're looking at a text, the first thing you might be able to do, sometimes it's easier than other times, but the first thing you can think about is, who is this text written for and why? Like, why did the author choose to do this, and how can you tell that it's for a certain specific audience? So you can think about the easy ones that you can think about might be like age, gender, education, and I've written a little bit more than that. But I think those are like the basic ones. So for example, a target audience could be young parents. Maybe the article is about how to raise a baby for the first time, or maybe it's an advertisement for some baby items. Then you can kind of think about the item or think about the main point of the article and be like, oh, that's for blah, blah, blah. And so same thing, I've listed a few examples of some target audiences. So we have elderly women, plant enthusiasts. Maybe it's an article on plants that maybe no one else would be interested in except for plant enthusiasts. Scientific community, I think that's one that might pop up on the IB exams. It might be an article with maybe slightly more complicated language that the average person might not be able to understand, or maybe the article lacks a bit of explanation, so then maybe you can tell, oh, like this article might be for someone who knows a little bit on the subject already. And so it's just noticing things like that. And then things you can look for is what kind of vocabulary, like what kind of words are being used. Like I said in the example, the science, maybe it's an article for scientists, then maybe the vocabulary is very scientific and complicated. Um, but if maybe it's for kids, the vocabulary might be really simple and it's, a combination of very short words and all of that. Maybe, oh, sorry about that. Okay. Maybe it mentions the location, so maybe it's a guide for maybe the cafes in London, and so maybe it's got London in the title, and you're like, oh, then this must be for people who are either planning to visit London or people who live in the local area, and so that's just something you can kind of gauge by looking at it, and it can be helpful to notice. And also just looking at maybe mention a specific culture or a religion, or maybe the author has a specific perspective that maybe some people might not agree with and might not want to read. So things like that. And then the second one is purpose. This kind of goes hand in hand with audience, but why did the author write this piece? And just knowing about the audience can help you learn about why the author wrote this piece. So, for example, if you know that it's for young parents who are trying to raise a baby, it's like the author wanted to help these parents, or maybe he wanted to share his knowledge on this. So the purpose you can kind of look at through looking at the title and the topic sentence. Do you know what a topic sentence is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, if you look at a topic sentence, you might be able to tell. Maybe the author might actually just write down exactly what his intent is. It's like, my goal is this, this, and this. Or he might not, but that's okay. Um, and then it also helps to identify text types, because I think text types are going to be a big thing that you're going to have to learn to identify in IB English, because you're going to have not just literary text, but you're going to have non-literary text, like advertisements or photographs, or you might have films, you might have maybe an informational pamphlet. So things like that. If the text you have is an informational pamphlet, you can kind of assume that the author's idea was to help people or give people information. But maybe the text type is an opinion column. Maybe the author is trying to share his opinion with other people, in which case his purpose is going to be different from if he had made an instruction manual or all of that. So do you have any questions about audience and purpose so far? Okay, so I think I have a few examples that I want you to look at and kind of think about what the audience might be. These are pretty short, so yeah. So the first one, I just found a fun little cat in the hat photo. I mean, I think you don't really even have to really read it, but can you kind of think about like what the audience might be for this and why maybe? And how can you tell?
Children, maybe children.
Yeah.
Because interested in restoration.
Yeah.
And yeah, like there's like something easy, like simple diversity.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're completely right. All the things you pointed out, and just the drawings and the simple language, and even like the rhyme and like the fun feeling to it all makes it pretty clear that it's for children. And so I have two other examples that are not for children. So maybe could you read number one and think about who this might be?